It's really nice to be here today. I've been part of the RSD community since RSD 5. I'm a designer by background, and my talk will probably be one of the more designerly talks compared to some of the other keynotes who've been more from a systems thinking perspective. I'm independent or self-employed or in between jobs or just unemployed, depending on how you frame it. I actually quit my job in April at TU Delft. I love research, I love teaching, I don't love the academic system, and one of the things I really struggle with is the disconnected causes. And that's why I really love to be here, because what I really love about the RSD community is that it very much feels like a community. I don't know any conference or symposium where you really feel like you are part of something. So for me, this is really a nice place to recharge. I wanted to start my talk by asking you, like, who has been at an RSD event or RSD conference before? Can I see some hands? Well, quite a lot of you. And who is here for the first time? Okay. Special welcome to those of you who are here for the first time. I want to prepare you a little bit for the experience. So my first RSD was RSD 5 in Toronto in 2016. And at the time I worked at the University of Technology Sydney and at the Design Innovation Research Centre. And I was advising Bridget Malcolm, who you can see in this photo, on her Master by Research project, which was about the application of design in a public sector context. And at a certain moment, Bridget said to me, she said, "Oh, Mieke, I've been reading this super interesting stuff about systemic design. There is a blog post from Birger Sewaldson and from Peter Jones, and I really want to do something with systems thinking." And I said, "Bridget, no, I don't think you should do it. You know, your project is already complicated enough." So. But eventually she convinced me. We went to RSD together. And I have to say, it's very interesting to be in an interdisciplinary space where two fields are coming together, because most of the people are coming from one end of the spectrum. And then it's always going to be a little bit intimidating, because you're going to hear a lot of things that you don't know yet. So, for example, I remember there was a keynote by Paul Pangaro about fourth order cybernetics, and everyone in the audience was like, And we didn't even know what cybernetics was. So we felt a bit uncomfortable. And then there was this amazing talk by Maturana, but we didn't know who Maturana was. But then we found out there's this all amazing work that he had been doing, and you really start to learn. So what I love about RSD is that there's kind of different ways of knowledge that are coming together, but because you create this human connection and this community feel, that's where the learning really starts to happen. So if at any point in this event you feel a little bit intimidated by the things that you're hearing, that's okay, right? It's just part of the experience. So as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about design today and about how it relates to systems thinking. And I really try to make it accessible for everyone. So maybe there's some parts that you think, oh, I already know this. But just bear with me. Towards the end, it will become a little bit more complex. So I actually changed the title of my talk, Designing to Reconnect, and I'll explain shortly why that is. And I wanted to start with showing you a video. And this is from an episode of a TV show which was called Heston's Missions Impossible. It was a TV show which ran in 2011, and Heston Blumenthal, famous chef who owns Michelin star restaurant in the UK, what he would do in the show, he would go to organizations and he would help those organizations with some kind of food challenge. And in this particular episode, which I really like, he goes to Children's Hospital, the Alderhay Hospital in Liverpool, an NHS institution. And the problem they're facing is that the children won't eat the food that's served. And that's problematic, because when children are recovering, they really need to eat. So Heston goes there, and he notices quite quickly that the food is quite boring, it's bland, and it's actually also not so healthy. So he whips up a solution. He thinks, this just needs to be, much better. food experience, it needs to be fun, and he creates these vegetables which looks like lollies, and then he tests this with the children, and children really like it, and they start to eat all the healthy vegetables. And then he gets to the point where he needs to convince the chefs and the management of his fantastic idea. So I'll just show a little bit of the show. This is what happens.
Heston's discoveries have left the staff feeling defensive.
We only get told what to do. We take the orders from other people. We just don't come in like Heston does, you know, with his restaurants. He gives the order. That's Heston. We're only, you know, we're only...
We can do that because he owns the restaurant. He can do what he likes, can't
he?
There's no quick fix on this. He'll never come in here and just create this one lovely meal and everything will change. It just won't happen. Never happen in a million years.
Experience what it's like to, for example, use multiple senses when eating. So he takes this dish from his Michelin star restaurant, and it's called Sounds of the Sea. So it's a very fancy dish, which has like, I don't know, has like miso and other gels and stuff. But it comes with a speaker in the shape of a shell, and while you're eating, you hear the sound of the sea. Yeah. So he goes to the chefs, and they have to experience this. And again, they're not convinced. They think it's way too fancy. How on earth are they ever going to, you know, do something like this? And then something really interesting happens. I'm sorry, the volume is a bit low, but I don't know. Can we do something about it? If it's too complicated, it doesn't matter.
No, if I just can do something.
No, it's just a 2-minute video. I can just, you just, sorry. No, that doesn't.
Okay.
Okay. It's okay. If you don't hear, I'll summarize. How is it going, they ask.
Excited first. Well, I failed. Miserably failed at that one.
With the cooks reluctant to get inspired, Heston thinks a trip to the ward might turn them. He wants the cooks to see for themselves how fun and imagination can get kids excited about food.
Our place is in the kitchen, not on a ward. Ward's for nurses.
It seems bizarre to me. The chefs are so reluctant to come up and meet the people who eat their food. So have a listen. Does this bring back any memories for you?
Yeah.
Does it? Oh, go on then. Oh, is it where'd you live?
Born and lived in the Caribbean till last year.
Oh my word.
So that just sounds like our backyard.
Fantastic.
Brought some nice memories back, didn't it?
It's brilliant, yeah. But I could see his,
Brought some nice memories.
but could you see his eyes just sort of lit up? So, do you think, oh yummy, that really reminds me of eating, I don't know, ice cream, fish and chips? A drink? Oh, what drink?
Water.
Water. Is there any foods that you think of eating?
Ice cream.
Ice cream.
But then with sweets inside it.
Oh, you're making me hungry now.
The kids' reactions are winning the cooks over.
Doesn't that make you feel fantastic?
It makes you feel like that's what you're here for.
Yeah.
You can make such a difference to their lives.
For
It makes you feel like that's what you're here for. That's what he says. And what happens afterwards is they go back to the kitchen, and then they become all creative, and they start creating these new dishes together, and they really start to promote this as well with the management. And I actually think it's such a brilliant thing to do, right? Rather than trying to push your solution, you already know what the solution is. He makes a connection, and it's quite a crucial or essential connection, a human connection between the chefs and between and children. The things that the reason why they are there. And I actually think that creating this connection is almost like a kind of a leverage point, right? It's a small one, but it's definitely bigger than just, pushing your healthy meal. So he creates a connection in a system that's essentially a disconnected and fragmented health system. And we see that in many places, and it's come up throughout the conference already. We live in a disconnected world. There's a lot of individualization and separation, a lot of competition. We're treated as individuals and not as groups of people. There's a fragmentation of services. There's a different service for any part of our life, for any part of our health. There's a fragmentation of work caused by the division of labor, but there's also lots of technologies that lead to fragmentation of work. And last week, Karen O'Brien was talking in the online conference about her work on quantum social change. And she showed this image, and I thought this represented this idea of disconnect quite well. So there's a separation between me and you in this competition, between us and others, things like polarization, between society and the larger environment, and between humans and nature. And to steal another slide from a previous speaker, Anna Burney, when she spoke, she showed this quote from Donella Meadows, which says, "The world is a complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system, but we treat it as if it were not, as if it were divisible, separable, simple, and infinite. Our persistent, intractable global problems arise directly from this mismatch." And she said this already in 1982, right? So it's not like we're only just becoming aware of it. So the question is, what can we do to reconnect? And this is a big question, and I should think it's not just a question for designers, right? So you might think of this in terms of leadership practices or management practices. When you think about Heston, what he was doing, I would consider that's more kind of a leadership practice. You might think of it in terms of conversations, like we're doing here at the event. But I think for this community, the most relevant question to ask is, what can we do from a systemic design perspective when we talk about reconnecting? So before I'm going to introduce my ideas on this, I'd like to position it within the field of systemic design. And Birger, when you opened the online event last week, you already pointed at the definition of systemic design on the SDA website, which states that systemic design is an interdiscipline that joins systems thinking to design methodology. And it's a broad definition and it's a broad field. So Birger also always talks about the different dialects within the field. And also in the online event, the first presentations were already about the different systemic design programs, for example. Last year, I wrote a blog post about which provides an overview on the field of systemic design, and people found it quite useful, so I'll briefly summarize it here. So if we think about relating systems thinking design, the integration of systems thinking and design, there's different ways in which we can look at what is being designed and what the intention of that design is. So if we talk about the integration of systems thinking and design as systems design, and we think of a system as something that has kind of clear boundaries that are defined by designers, it has parts that are defined by designers, and it has relationships between those parts that can be defined and controlled by designers, then we can actually also design something that has a certain system property. So this would mostly refer to, for example, a technical system where we have control over all the different elements. But could also, for example, be maybe a regulatory system that consists of many related rules. Now, in systemic design, we usually talk about complex systems, and complex systems cannot be designed as such. First of all, they have boundaries that are not objective, so they are subjectively defined. If you talk about the education system, then what is included, what is excluded, for example. There's many parts that we don't have control over. So there's two ways of thinking about this. One is system conscious design, one is system shifting design. It's an idea that was introduced by the UK Design Council, who wrote this report about system shifting design in 2021. So system conscious design is where you design something with a certain function, and while designing that, you take into account the larger complex context. Birger always uses the example of a cup of coffee, which you also describe in your book, Designing for Complexity. So the function of a cup of coffee is, of course, to allow someone to drink coffee, but it's connected in so many ways to the planet and to other social systems, both in the production of the paper cup and of the coffee, and also during the use of the cup and afterwards, that there's a lot to take into account. And this image is from a poster that I found here somewhere in the building. I think some of the students created it to represent these connections between a cup of coffee and all the different contexts. So system conscious design is about not doing any harm to a system. Well, system shifting design has quite a different purpose. So here we're designing something which main intention is to shift a system. So this kind of broadly accepted idea that complex systems, because we can't design them, but we can try to shift them into a certain direction. Now, this idea comes with a number of caveats, because of course this sounds like amazing. I just designed something and the whole system starts to shift. This is not normally how it works. So we know there's like a lot of different things that need to happen. You know, we have to talk about portfolios. These things don't just come from design, right? So there's many different practices, disciplines that contribute to system shifting. And it takes a long time. It's a long process, and it's essentially a learning process, because through each thing that we do, we learn more about the system and how we might be able to shift it. So we have these three things: system design, system shifting, system conscious design, and they can actually happen at the same time. So I might be designing a system that is intending to shift the larger system, but in that process, you will also want to be conscious of not doing any harm. And then we have a range of different practices. So systemic visualization, systems visualization is quite popular within systemic design. Here we use the practice of visualization, design practice of visualization, and integrate it with systems thinking as a tool to enable a sense making and make sense of a complex world. And you know, it's also used as more of a dialogic tool to bring ways of knowing together. Then there's something that we've called designing from within. So that's based on the idea that systems are continuously designed and redesigned by system residents, as I like to call them. So there could, for example, be service staff who are decorating a room or creating a new form, or managers creating a new rule. And design is then has two purposes. So it's people designing within the system, but you can also then design a kind of system structure that supports that designing. And the last thing, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, is what we call systemic design reasoning. So that's really about, you know, what kind of interventions can help us really shift those systems in the direction that we want to have. Again, visualizations, designing from within, and reasoning, they are all connected to each other, right? So you can, in one and the same project, you can use many practices from each of these perspectives. Okay, design reasoning, what does that mean? So design reasoning is based on the idea that design comes with a specific way of knowing. And over the past 50 years, there have been quite a lot of academics who've studied how designers think, also called a designerly way of knowing. And design reasoning is one of the practices that designers adopt in that way of knowing. So Kees Dorst, he wrote this paper about it, The Core of Design Thinking and Its Application. And he describes that basically in design reasoning, what designers do is they talk about a certain design, the what. Then they have to think about how that design is going to work. And that leads to a certain value. That's kind of like the basic formula of design. But how this is created, this design reasoning is actually not a linear process. So usually it's a kind of vague. So you start with some idea of the value you want to have, but that in the process you need to find out, okay, what is it that we're going to design, how is it going to work? And that's very much a evolving process. And very often it's not even completely clear what value it is that we want to have. So example, if you think about an event like RSD, let's say we want collective learning about systemic design. We organize an event and we do like a single track event because we assume that a single track gives people something to talk about. And then we're going to include some walk and talks because walking is a comfortable way to talk openly. Yeah, so these are the assumptions in the design that we hope will get us the value that we want. And this is called the working principle. It's called in Kees Dorf's paper. But they're usually they're principles, and they're usually almost like patterns that the designers actually have to design. Now, this design reasoning, every designer reasons in a designerly way. Every designer makes assumption about how something is going to work, but it's not always made explicit. So important in this talk is that we try to make the reasoning as explicit as possible. This design reasoning is not just something that a designer does sitting in the corner of the room and just thinking like, what am I going to design? There's lots of different knowledge, methods, practices, and tools that we can use. So tools like thinking tools, visual tools, dialogic tools, practices like research, conversations, prototype testing, and then there's also knowledge that you bring as a designer. There might be certain principles you use in your work, a repertoire, academic knowledge, etc. And if every designer kind of develops their own practice, or every design team develops their own practice. So let me give an example of what this process can look like. So this is a bit of an older case. I did in 2016, but I like it because it explains very well how design reasoning works in practice. So this was a case by MindLab when it still existed, the design agency that was embedded within the Danish government. And the case was called A Time Quality Dilemma for Teachers. And in this project, there had been an educational reform by the government. And the result of that reform was that teachers in primary schools, they got less time to prepare their lesson, but they were still expected to produce the same quality. And the government said, you just have to work more efficiently and share knowledge. Teachers were not so happy with this. They got very frustrated. They said, we need our time to prepare our lessons. Some threatened to resign. So then MindLab was called in by one of the municipalities and asked, can you help us with this? So the desired value here was to share knowledge so teachers can work more efficiently. Now MindLab's approach was based on one of the things they use quite a lot is provocative prototypes. So they go very quickly to designing prototypes because they use that prototype to find out more about the challenge. Another thing they do is they use quite a lot of analogies and metaphors to find solutions. So they were thinking, what is a context where people want quality but don't have a lot of time to prepare? And what can we learn from that context? And they thought, cooking. So if you think of a meal kit, like for example, HelloFresh meal kit, it's like this box you get with ingredients and there's a recipe. And that really saves you time preparing, but you still can have a good meal. What if we create a lesson box? So it has ingredients for a lesson and a recipe for a lesson, so it saves the teacher's time. And then if you take all the teachers and get them to put that knowledge in this lesson box, then through that you kind of share that knowledge. So they then organized this session where teachers came together to create this box, and teachers started to create the box. But the teachers, well, let me first show you this. Sorry, I'll get to that later. So this is the design reasoning assumptions in the lesson box. So the goal, the value was still to get teachers to work more efficiently by sharing knowledge. And the assumption was you can get people to share knowledge by collecting their knowledge and translate it into a recipe and put it in a box. If someone is told exactly what to do and is given the right tools to do this, then that saves time in preparation. So they found out very quickly through this provocative prototype that this was actually not the case. So the teachers didn't like this at all. They said, we get stuff like this all the time. We just piling up in the corner of the room. We don't use it because it doesn't take into account what I want to do in my lesson. I want something that I can customize to how I, shape my teaching. And also, it didn't really take into account their expertise as a teacher. I mean, you would never give a meal kit to a chef, right? So why would you give a lesson box to a teacher? So they learned that they needed something that is more customizable. And then eventually, after another 10 provocative prototypes or so, they came to this idea. It's called speed sharing. And it's based on the idea of speed dating. So teachers get together around a specific theme. So teachers from different schools get together around a theme, for example, mathematics, physical exercise, how do I provide feedback on an assignment, etc. They speed date, and in the speed date they kind of share ideas, and then they go on to the next person, etc. Teachers really love this idea, and they actually also started to implement this. It worked really well. The teachers, they really liked that it was customizable, so you can only pick what is relevant to you. It matches teachers based on interest, and an unexpected result was that teachers felt really proud if they saw that their ideas mattered to others. So, some teachers would take ideas, and then, it's really nice if other people use your ideas. So the design reasoning here was, if someone's matched to someone with similar interests and different ideas, they can inspire each other. And it makes you feel proud to see that other people use your ideas. And the outcome there is that teachers share knowledge, they're inspired to develop their lessons. So it's a bit more than just sharing, there's also inspiration. And they're proud of their work. So the value is a little bit increased. So this example shows how design reasoning works, right? It's not like just a formula that you fill in. No, through learning, you work your way through a reasoning that eventually also is validated. Now, today we're talking about systemic design reasoning. So how can we reason towards systems change? And at the Design Research Society conference this year, we presented this paper. So this paper we wrote with colleagues of the Systemic Design Lab at TU Delft. And basically what we argued there was that if we're in a system shifting context, then what we do is the working principle that we develop has to be systemic. But it also has to be contextual, right? So it's not like I'm just going to take off the leverage points and that gives me the answer. No, I have to apply that in the specific context that I'm working. And the outcome there is not just value for stakeholders, but there's also some kind of systemic value. I won't go through all the different principles that we discuss in this paper, but I'll tell you a little bit about the idea of the leverage points. I'm assuming this would be familiar to most of you, based on the work of Donella Meadows. So places in a system where a small change could lead to a large shift in behavior. And Donella Meadows, she described 12 different leverage points, which we think are useful in designing those working principles. I also like to point out Ryan Murphy's paper in the Context Journal, because I thought he wrote a really nice review of Meadows' work. And Meadows actually invited the community to further develop her idea of leverage points, which was already introduced in the late 90s. But there's actually not been so much work on the further development of the leverage points. So I think there's still a bit of work to do. So today I'm talking about designing to reconnect. What kind of patterns, working principles can we use to design to create those connections? And this is a work in process. So I'm working on a book. It's a bit uncomfortable to present something that's not finished, but that's okay. I think this is probably the best place to present this work, because then we can have a conversation about it. And in this book, I am exploring different types of connections. Connection to purpose, connection to collective learning and creativity, connecting to life, seeing connections, and there might be other connections that are relevant. Today I'm only going to talk about the top two, because I'll need some time to explain it, and I prefer that over like a superficial description of all of these different types of connections. So the first one is about reconnecting to purpose, which is about how what we do connects to why we're doing it and what that means to us. So think of the chefs in the children's hospital. Somehow they connected more to their purpose by connecting to the children. So purpose is important. Purpose is important on an individual level. A connection to purpose and meaning is one of the important elements that contributes to human flourishing. So this is from Seligman's book, but also John Ehrenfeld talked about this last week in the online conference. And there are also possible health benefits associated with living a life rich in purpose and meaning. So for an individual to have a purpose and to be able to connect to that purpose is super important. It's not just for individuals important, it's also on a social system level important. Bella Banati, he describes how social systems such as education are purposeful creations. People in these systems select, organize, and carry out activities to attain a purpose. So an education system has a purpose as well. And a social system is a particular type of system in which both the parts and the whole are purposeful. A purposeful individual can change its goals in constant environmental condition. It selects goals as well as the means by which to pursue them. So this is from Ackhoff and Emery, 1972. So purpose is not the same as a goal. That's important because very often this is how purpose is translated. Like you see, for example, in academic systems, where I would think the purpose is to contribute to the body of knowledge and to prepare students for a complex world. But very often, universities are very much focused on the rankings, for example, so a measurable goal. So a goal is something that you can choose in relation to your purpose, and the purpose is usually more stable. Okay, so what can we do to design to connect to purpose? I originally had 2 examples here, but I don't have time to go through them. So I just chose the one that I think is most interesting. But if you're thinking of the children's hospital, you can already imagine that one of the patterns that contributes to connecting to purpose is a feedback loop, right? So just getting feedback on what you're doing is very important to keep you going. Right? That's why I really like presenting my work at a conference where I can actually see the audience and we can have a conversation about it, because then I get some feedback and it kind of keeps me hopefully going in writing this book. So, but I'm going to introduce some other patterns, because a feedback loop is just one of the patterns that contributes to connecting to purpose. And the case I'm going to present is, I mean, it's always the case with design cases. It's in a specific context, and it's a context in which you might actually not know what your purpose is in the first place. And this is in youth unemployment. So unemployment early in one's life can have negative impact for the whole lifetime for an individual, and it also has a cost at a societal level. So if you're unemployed and you're young, then it's really difficult to, it has a huge influence, consequences for your confidence, for how you're feeling about what you might be able to contribute. And that becomes kind of this vicious cycle, and it becomes harder and harder to become employed. That's not just bad for individuals. I really don't think it's in anyone's interest if individual people cannot make a meaningful contribution to society. And it's not just for financial reasons. So this is an important topic to address. Now, the dominant way of thinking about employment is actually quite linear and individual. So we might think, okay, this person is unemployed. What we need to do is we need to motivate this person, and we need to give them the skills to get the job they need. So we're going to give them some rules and incentives to motivate them. Maybe threaten them to take away their welfare payments if they don't apply for a job, and give them information and advice. So train them in how to do a job interview, or give them like a test where they can find out what the best job is for them. Then we give them the options, different jobs, person selects the best option, success, the person is employed, problem solved. This is how many employment services actually work, but they don't work, right? So, but this is the working principle. So the case I'm going to introduce is called Next Work. It was introduced to me by Jenny Winhall when she worked at the Rockwell Foundation Intervention Units. I'm not going to take you through the whole process, but I just wanted to show you this this diagram because it shows that they take a lot of time to really think through how this could work, right? It's definitely not a quick fix. And at the moment, it's implemented in a number of municipalities, and they're running a randomized control test, so really monitoring the effects. So this is how Next Work works, or this is what it is. So it doesn't look linear. So it consists of, in each municipality you have a youth network. So they're groups of 6 to 8 youth together who collectively are looking for employment. And then there's a business network, a local business network of businesses that can offer job opportunities. They organize a matching event, so the youth is matched to the businesses. Then they go into an internship. But this is not a one-off. There's a diversity of things they can do. And I think that's crucial, because if you don't know what you want or what your purpose is, you're not going to find it, just by doing a test. You have to experience it to find out what that is. So they get a diversity of experiences, and after each experience, they go back into their youth network and reflect. So this whole process for reflection. So collectively, they learn together. And this actually works really, really well for the youth. Now, what's interesting about the Next Work is that it comes with explicit working principles and patterns. Working principle many-to-many means that it's based on building these relationships between the youth and between the business and between the two networks. Change of power is important. So the youth, they really get agency and power to make their own decisions. And it's based around building this work identity. So youth finding what their purpose is, but also that something that's in line with their strength and what they can offer. So the design reasoning, you could say, looks like this. So the diversity of experiences is needed to find purpose and strength, the work identity. Collective reflection on experience supports learning, and making your own decisions is important. And that leads to developing work identity and a sustained job or education. So it's not just about getting a job, but actually staying in the job. And what's interesting is that this reasoning has another level to it, because what they do in this program is they really communicate the principles. So it's not so much about, here's your blueprint for this service. No, it's like, here's the principles, this is how it's supposed to work. Let's make this thing work for your municipality in this case. And its focus on principles is really focused on kind of more changing the mental models towards the principles, so that people in municipalities also can think about, okay, actually it's really important to have these many relationships, to have this change in power, and to work on this working identity. So I put it in a table, but the table might not be the best way to explain how this works, because you can already see that there's kind of connections between all of these different elements. And collectively, this creates this pattern that explains how this initiative works and what it achieves. So which patterns help us developing working principles to connect to purpose? It's different for each context, but some general things that we can say is that feedback loops are important, and active reflection, diversity of experience when you don't know what your purpose is yet, and human relationships are super important, and this then often is achieved through some kind of matching mechanism. So this brings me to the second connection I wanted to share, which is about connecting to collective learning and creativity, which is actually something that you already see in this case as well. So this focus on human relationships is super important. So connecting to collective learning and creativity is related to the leverage point of self-organization, the power to self-organize the system in Donella Meadows' list of leverage points. I'm assuming most of you are aware of what self-organization is, but I'll just give a quick introduction for those of you who are not. So this is how I usually explain it to my students. Take this example of a flock of birds, and you have this murmuration. These shapes emerge, these beautiful shapes, but there's no one bird that is in control of creating the shape. The shape emerges through self-organization, and self-organization means the ability of interconnected autonomous agents of a complex adaptive system to evolve into an organized form without external force. So what that means is that the way that the shape emerges is through the interactions between local birds. Because each bird, in case of starlings, it's like one starling is connected to about 7 other starlings, and through all those connections, they then are all connected to each other, and that's through this pattern, this whole system can actually adapt. So for example, when there's a predator or when there's a change in wind conditions, the whole thing starts to move. So for a system to be able to adapt, it's really important that there are connections. And the same counts for a social system, so systems of human beings. When the humans are connected to each other, collectively they can start to adapt. So I'm just going to explain this through the same case, the Mind Lab case. So we go back to this Mind Lab case where the teachers were supposed to share their knowledge. And we look at the lesson box. This is what, on a systemic level, you could say a lesson box looks like. So if we have all the teachers in their classroom, they're connecting to their students. We give all of the teachers from our organization a lesson box. What the teachers are doing in their students, in their classrooms will be very similar, right? We can kind of, it's not like full control because we can never control what actually happens on a day-to-day basis, but we can have a bit of a control on what happens in the classroom. But if we look at the speed sharing, it creates an interesting connection. So here we start to connect teachers to each other. And this is something really interesting happens here because when 2 teachers come together and they share knowledge, it's not just an exchange, right? Because when 2 stories come together, something new emerges. That's also what we sometimes call possibility. There's possibility there that is created. There's creativity that emerges and novelty. And you can imagine if someone here on the left has a great idea, that then that idea starts to flow through the different schools. So it creates knowledge flows, and teachers learn from each other. And actually it created something additional. The teachers have started to motivate each other, and it created a positive vibe. So vibe is very difficult to measure, but that's basically what it is, right? It's kind of this shared energy, like, oh, we can do this together. So what is interesting about this idea is once you start connecting people, the system as a whole can also, and doesn't just create a positive vibe, but it can adapt. And this is actually what happened in the COVID-19 pandemic, when as teachers we had to adapt very quickly to the changing circumstances. And I really think that the places where this worked very quickly was where teachers were connected to each other. Because there's no one at the top who knows how to manage this, but if we start connecting people, then collectively we can try to find our way. Yeah, so we have more control system, and we have a more complex adaptive system. And it depends very much on the context what is needed, because there's always often a level of control that's needed, but also a level of adaptation. So I think it's interesting for designers to start adopting these kinds of perspectives in their design reasoning. And it's actually not what Mind Lab did explicitly, or maybe might not have been aware of. This is just what I added. But here you see that the working principle, in addition to the ones I already presented, there's also this idea that if you bring diverse people together in a dialogue, it leads to knowledge flows and collective creativity. And knowledge flows and collective creativity then can contribute to an adaptive school system. Okay, so I talked about connecting to purpose, connecting to collective learning and creativity. I'm just going to give some references for the last 2 because I won't have time to go into depth. Connecting to life is about connecting all the different parts of people's lives. And the best resource for that is Hilary Cotham's book, Radical Help. I highly recommend it. She describes 5 cases of the design agency Participle in redesigning welfare services. And what I really like about it is that they describe very well what the working principles and patterns are of each of these cases and how they were developed. And making these human relationships is core to each of the different cases. There might be all kinds of other connections that I'm not talking about today. Connection to nature, connection to food. I thought I mentioned it because there will be some talks about food later. It's not just about creating connections, it's also what we can design to help people see connections. This idea of mental model change. And this is actually it's my presentation of last year at RSD Online. I have the video on my website if you want to know more about it. It's quite nice. I thought it was a really nice example from one of the students who graduated with me. She was looking at how we can help people in the health system around special needs children and their parents, how we can make the people who work in that health system see their system in a new way. And she did that through the design of a children's book. Because she had like a systems map, but that was not going to work. So she translated it in a really nice children's book, in which the parent is a hedgehog and each of the stakeholders is a different animal. So if you want to know more about that, you can go to my website. So the practice that I'm starting to develop here or want to present to you today, I like to call social systemic design reasoning. And it's based on the ideas that humans are complex. We really need to understand on a deeper level who we are as human beings and how we function. So we could say we need to apply a humanizing design practice. We also need to acknowledge that social systems are complex, that sometimes we need to let go of control where possible and enable learning, creativity, and possibility. That we make our design reasoning explicit, that we situate it in the specific context that we work, but at the same time develop general principles and patterns to design to connect. And I hope my work contributes to that.